Hello and welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. Today's episode is part of a mini-series for the month of Ramadan. Millions of Muslims around the world are fasting, abstaining from food and drink from dawn to dusk for 30 days as part of a month of worship and heightened spirituality. Today's episode is with the wonderful Suma Din, talking about her work and her book, Turning the Tide, Reawakening the Woman's Heart and Soul. We talk about the experiences and challenges that women face today, how our faith can help us navigate the ups and downs of life, aging, and so much more. Suma Din is an author, freelance researcher, and educator. Her work encompasses working with parents in adult education and working with Muslim women and girls in community-focused education programs. As a non-fiction author, her titles for children support humanities subjects, and for adults, she writes on motherhood, women, and spirituality. Assalamu alaikum, Suma. Thank you so much for joining me on the Diverse Bookshelf today. How are you?
Walaikum salam, Samia. I am so honoured and really grateful to be invited on here. Yes, it's lovely to connect with you after seeing all your amazing posts and listening to some of your other podcasts as well. And alhamdulillah, I'm well in sunny Buckinghamshire this morning.
That's good. It's sunny where I am too, which is such a welcome change, alhamdulillah. But I'm grateful that it's sunny, but it's not hot. Especially while fasting, I think that's such a blessing. But I would really love it if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, about the work that you do, and kind of how it led you into writing. And I want to talk today about your book, Turning the Tide. So if you could give us a little bit of a backstory, that would be great.
Right. So I am mum to 3 adult children. That's probably one thing. And I've recently become a grandmother as well, a nanny, so that's lovely. But yeah, I mean, in terms of my background, I've born and raised in England. I lived in London for most of my life. I studied English at university, and then I went into teaching, but not youngsters, it was adults. And I went into quite specifically like family learning and training parents and helping them to help their children in terms of literacy, reading, writing, all of that. So that was on the one side. And on the other side, I've always written. I can't think of a time I didn't write. Even when I was 6, 7 years old, I don't know what gibberish it was, but I was writing. And the thing that came naturally was writing journal, diaries, letters, even at that age. And I never stopped. So it's always been the place I think has been on the page. The place I work everything out has been on the page, not because that was something that was a good thing to do or I'd been advised. It was just the way I suppose I've evolved, and it's the way I'm wired, right from the beginning. So when I look back at, okay, how did I start writing? It was organic on the one hand, and on the other hand, turning the tide, as you mentioned it, to be a bit more specific about that, that came from a time of my life where I got right to the end of my 20s. I had 2 little girls, alhamdulillah, at that time, very, very busy, and in a nutshell, feeling quite lost and feeling like, well, what is it all about? There's like academia, study, then there's very demanding sort of life with family, and I was expecting my 3rd baby as well in the midst of that, and it was definitely born from wanting to I think reorientate myself and just like refresh, as the title says, sort of reawaken the heart and soul. So I came into writing through a need to fill a gap, which I couldn't find the sort of literature that I was looking for. I was reading other books on women's development and soul, and it's not, I wouldn't want to use the word empowering, but sort of guiding women, that kind of literature. And it always felt as though I got to a dead end in those books, where it wasn't speaking to a holistic view of the way I saw life in terms of our faith, in terms of the dunya and the akhirah and that balance. And so that actually led me to, looking back at the Islamic sources.
That's really interesting. So the book, Turning the Tide, is a book about the experiences of women. I think it's probably the right way to like sum it up. You divide the book into different stages that a lot of women will go through, kind of, starting from like childhood to getting married and later on, and then you even talk about the hereafter as well. And you've talked about this kind of this like gap that you've seen in literature. What was it that led you to write this specific book that was aimed at women and set up in this way? Because it's a really unique structure, and maybe you can tell our readers, because it's got like a kind of like a creative narrator voice in it, but it's also got Quran and Hadith ayahs and other reflections. Yeah, what led to that?
Yeah, it is layered, so it's helpful probably when we're not looking at the book physically to actually describe it and be able to go through with it. So when I started researching, I was looking at verses of Quran translated and Hadith and our sacred sources of women who were inspiring from our background, from the Islamic sources. And when I put a lot of that together, it seemed to make sense to me to go chronologically, because I really was focusing on the heart and soul. It's not just in the title as something that sounds nice. It really, really is about where's our soul coming from and what's its purpose on this earth as Muslim women. Because this is more or less, it is talking to a Muslim women audience. So when I gathered the quotes that I found inspiring and I thought would help others as well, I looked at it from the inception of the soul all the way through, as you mentioned, but also adding areas like there's a chapter on knowledge, there's a chapter on the heart, there's a chapter which is very close to all women, it's our nature, health and appearance. Okay. And there's a chapter as well as marriage and motherhood, but on the elderly stage of life. And I call that the age of wisdom, because that's something we should venerate and be, really proud of, actually, the elders in our community and in our families. And finally, as you said, yes, it's the soul's journey on, which deals with a chapter on death, essentially, and what our faith and our sacred texts say about that. Now, when I put that together, it's one thing to write about those stages, and I wrote a bit at the beginning of every chapter, and then I layered it with contemporary angst, is the best way I could describe it. Sort of contemporary issues and conflicts and attitudes, but rather than being kind of heavy-handed and discussing it in an academic way, I did it through fictional voices, and those are called myriad voices. So they're just like sound bites of what someone's thinking, and it's in sort of poetic prose. Some of it's poetry, some of it's like an extract from a diary, just like little droplets of thoughts on what's challenging us at that stage. And to give an example, like in the childhood chapter, I've got the voices of, an unborn child, as well as voices from childhood, voices from those looking after children. It takes a variety of perspectives. So that's your myriad voices. That's the connection bit between the sacred text and us in contemporary lives that we're living. And then after that comes the bulk of each chapter, which is the extracts from the translated Quran ayahs and Hadith. And then after that comes an example of an exemplary woman from history. So I cover, all the well-known names, and it's quite short. It's more like a pen portrait, but in order to inspire and motivate us about that particular stage of life. So as I was mentioning, childhood, for example, I've got in that chapter the example of Fatima radiallahu anha. Okay, and I've got also in the soul chapter, I've got the example of the Lady Hajra, the mother of Ismail alayhi salam and the wife of Prophet Ibrahim, as a really inspirational soul that was an independent inspirational soul on top of the rest of her story. At the end of every chapter, I then have du'as. So this is like your 5 layers in every chapter. And the du'as are there because those are our bond, those are our huge sort of vehicle of moving on and connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what all of Ramadan is for us, isn't it? It's connecting, coming back to our Creator and strengthening the ties of that taqwa. So yeah, that's how the chapters are structured. But there's another element to it, which when you mentioned the creative side, that was when I put this together and thought, no, there's something missing. It's just not gelling enough. And I thought, and I feel that Islam is a holistic deen. It is about what we do outside and nature around us, as well as ourselves, our bodies, our relationships, community. It's all holistic. So when I thought about, well, what is it that's missing? I realized that the best way to join all this together is to use one of the natural ayat. And water just literally sprung to mind as the best way to kind of bring that creativity, but also with a level of meaning, because water is mentioned several times in the Quran for several different reasons, as a metaphor, as something to teach us. And then there's also the dangers of water. There's the beauty of it, the absolute necessity we have for it. We're mostly made of water, aren't we? So I brought the water metaphor in, and every chapter is likened to a type of water. And I bring that in with the introduction as well. And then in the latest 4th edition that is out now from 2020, the illustrations, the photographs that were originally there are actually replaced with watercolor illustrations. So we've finally brought it all together by the 4th edition to really bring water to life as an inspiration, as something sacred, as something refreshing, something, our lives are so tied with water as Muslims as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, the way you describe it, it sounds like it's a really complex structure. And I mean, it must have been complex in writing it, but I think reading it, it doesn't feel like disjointed or messy. And I think that the thing that is so nice about it is that it's grounded in both sort of like Islamic literature, so with Quran and Hadith, but also this myriad voice. I really like the myriad voice because it gives real world like sensitivity and grounding, which helps, I think, understand some of the more spiritual and more abstract things as well that you write about. So I really enjoy it. I enjoyed it, and yeah, I mean, I thought it was great, and I did wonder at one point as well, like what it must have been like writing it. Like, did you write it per section, or did you write all of the myriad voices all at once and all the hadith sections all at once? Like, how did you do it? How did you do that?
That's a really good question that no one's ever asked me, actually. So I mean, it's interesting to talk about it. Thanks, Samia. The myriad voices are the product of being in absolute chaos at the time, a lot of the time. It's not chaos in a negative sense. There's a kind of a positivity to that chaos. 3 children under the age of 6 in your household, and we're, trudging along as families do, good days, bad days, all of that in between. And so the myriad voices were written in tiny little snippets, just whenever I had that quiet hour, which was a real luxury in those days. And I would writing was, as I said earlier, just my natural default. So I had a lot of thoughts and reflections in diaries anyway. So I did have that to fall back on. For example, when I did the youth chapter, I went straight back to my teenage diaries. With some horror as well, as one does when you look back and you think, no, that wasn't me at 13. But then it was. And that's what I was thinking. And that's what your average 13-year-olds are grappling with. They hate everyone half the time. They're frustrated. They sometimes, full of energy and innovative and super intelligent. Other times everything just sucks. It's rubbish. All these highs and lows. So I revisited some of my old diaries. That was one way. And the other way was I have developed a really fluid way of just writing. So I would have these little notebooks in my handbag or baby bag, wherever. And I didn't need to be sat at a desk to do those myriad voices. I would just write wherever I was, wherever it was convenient, wherever I was in the mood, and we're in a park and we're there for like hours, and I'd sit on my own for a little bit of that time while my husband's with the kids. And I remember doing that quite a bit in Kew Gardens because we lived nearby at that time and we went there a lot. And it was just like an ideal place where I could actually pen some of those myriad voices. So literally anywhere. Sometimes it wasn't such pretty places. It was my husband taking the kids to the grocery and he'd say, I'll just take them all and sort it out. And I'd sit in the car because it'd been days on end where I couldn't do anything. And I would sit in the car and write some myriad voices there. Not often, but I'm kind of demystifying the fact that it's not always this amazing, you have to be sat in the British Library to write this masterpiece or something. When you're in that phase of life, you just make it up as you go along and you just do what you can do. And it's a lot easier now, 20 something years on, I can sit at the desk and just write and have hours and hours to myself. But at that time, it was, it came from a lot of bits. The recent edition, the 2020 edition, I have added quite a few more myriad voices. And those have come from having the luxury of time to sit and pen poems. And to try, this is not about just what I was feeling or thinking, it's trying to capture the sort of the vibe and the essence of our time amongst Muslim women.
Yeah, I mean, well, that I guess was the next thing I was going to ask you, because the first edition of the book I think came out in 2009. If I'm
2004, 2005.
Oh, okay, 2004, and that is, almost 20 years ago, almost.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a long time
you're
ago.
right.
And it's not just that time has passed. When we think about how much the world has changed, how much responsibilities, family life has changed, community has changed, entertainment has changed, like so much has changed. Did you feel that some of what you wrote in 2004 or was published in 2004 was not as relevant now or not as relatable now? What was that kind of revisiting it every few years, because you've got the fourth edition now? What's that process been like? Also, just because you are not now in the stage that you were when you wrote it, so you're kind of, I guess, looking back at some of your experiences with retrospect or in hindsight, which probably changes how you view things as well. I'm just interested to know what that process was like.
Really good question again, Samia, because it has had to grow. You're so right that 2004 me and 2020 me, there's a difference, and around us there's huge differences. I think one of the biggest one is the online life that I didn't have when this started. That was just something that hadn't even been conceived in the head. At the most, I think we sent emails. That was it. And I had access to a hadith database, which I found so useful. And that was like, wow, technology, a hadith database. But in terms of answering your question, yes, I did find a lot of things have changed, particularly in things like the discourse around motherhood. What I had read and what I'd understood, and the discussions I was having with women in 2004 had moved on so much in 2023. The family structure, the way there's a lot more sort of blended parenting. The work from home means father's a lot more present. The whole online world has created so much opportunity for women and for mums especially. This is just one example. I think every chapter I updated the introduction in 2020. For every single chapter, I took bits out and rewrote, what I felt was more contemporary. But I'm just using motherhood as one example. And I did adjust that because I felt that I'm in a different place, and I know my contemporaries are in a different place. And some of the ideas we had, they still stand the test of time because sacred is sacred, right? And so when your framework, and this is what Turning the Tide is essentially trying to do, is say, okay, there's a sacred framework. It's going to look different for everyone because me and you have each got very different lives. So we're going to, it's going to manifest in different ways that we look after our soul, our heart, and, our relationship with Allah. But other things are changing all the time. So while we looked at motherhood through the eyes of, yes, it's such a blessing and there's so much reward, etc., in everything we're doing, and it's testing, 20 years on, do I use the word cynical? I think I have a lot more experience and not seeing it through rose-tinted glasses and seeing things like the boundaries much more clearly now, and what becomes too much mothering. What becomes too much of an intense mothering experience, which if you are at the beginning, you can actually, I think I definitely fell into that category at the beginning. I was like so full on trying to do everything, be everything motherhood wise. And it's only later now when I can reflect and look at things and I can see it, the balance and where the balance goes wrong. And gain from that and then shared that. And that's what I tried to share. And it's actually come out in a lot of the myriad voices. So you're spot on, Samia. It's great. And it's also almost eerie that you pinpointed so well how I've had to change things to reflect collective change and my own. And I think it was one of the poems I wrote called Motherhood Rain. That's it. Because I liken motherhood to like rainfall. And I think that captures that change. That yes, we know it's rewardable. Yes, we know it's a very noble role. But my God, is it hard?
Yeah.
And is it conflicting and complicated? And there are so many messages around it now, which are not all complementary to one another. And you have to use this critical mind to figure out what you're doing in this role and what you're not doing in this role. And I think updating the book with that poem, it's not really sweet about motherhood at all, that poem. It's more like, yeah, this is tough and confusing.
Yeah. I mean, I think definitely one of the things that has changed a lot in recent years is just kind of how honest people are being about their experiences. Absolutely. And whether it's with raising children or it's trying to get married or it's studying, like whatever it is, I feel like there's generally a lot more honesty, and it's going side by side with also the curated Instagram living your dream kind of life. It's a bit strange, but the two things do seem to be happening side by side, which is interesting and quite refreshing, I think. And you can almost make a decision about what it is that you want to see and what you want to engage with. You can kind of curate also your own social media feed, which I think does help a lot. You can block accounts, you can, block certain hashtags and whatnot, which mean that you're going to see more of one type of content rather than another, which I think helps you deal with whatever stage of life that you're at. But one of the things that I think perhaps we don't talk about enough is the fact that still society places so much emphasis on women being married and being mothers. And I think, especially for Muslim women, this is something that so many struggle with, because if it isn't happening for you, if you're not finding a partner, or whatever's happening, or you're married but you're not able to have children yet, or you're having various struggles, when you know that it's also so deeply rooted in your faith and it is so pleasurable to Allah, it's something that you struggle with massively. And then also to kind of feel as though, well, I'm only validated, or I only seem to be accepted as a full woman if I am somebody's wife or I am a mother. It's a really difficult, like a massively difficult experience. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, which I'm sure you do. And if you could share your views on that.
Yeah, that is so that's so relevant, because it is something that we, as a community, family, friends, peers, we do discuss this. And I think, and I agree that I'm glad there is a lot more openness to discuss that now, which wasn't there. Sort of 25 years ago, it wasn't there. There were discussions, but not at the level and in the sort of public domain that there are now. And I think it is tough because, on the one hand, I've always worked sort of within the family sector, if you want to put it that way, and then other research and books I've done are on motherhood. And I'm really aware while I'm doing this that this is not the only narrative. This is just one role that, yes, it's a blessed role. Yes, it's also a very testing role. But equally, why I come back to the soul all the time is because that is what's going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the soul of a person. And it's independent of the roles that we played. We have to take, I see it like, like a piece of material or fabric, that what we've been cut is the rizq Allah's given us. So whether that's single, that's with children, without children, whether that's, I know women who have not biologically had children for whatever reason, but they do such a huge role, and they have such a huge role in young people's lives. That's what was their remit. That is their fabric that's cut for them. And that's what we're all going to be, presenting and being questioned. And that's what we're working with in this world. So I completely sympathize with the issues that women are going through when they feel that they're pigeon boxed, that either you're a mother or you're a wife. And if you're not, well, then, what's the value to your life? We have these discussions in the house. I've got 2 adult daughters, and it's not easy getting married. Honestly, I've completely, even though I'm the mom and, now grandmother, alhamdulillah, but I'm 100% inside that struggle because I feel it. I can see it. It's part of my reality as well. What the difficulty is in the world we're living in. There's lots of discussions about the online matchmaking apps, and then the auntie issues, and then that's another whole huge subject. But the fact that people get pigeonholed into these binaries, either you're a mum or you're not, either you're married or you're not, that's very limiting. And I don't feel for a moment that our faith limits a woman's soul, being, value at all. Quite on the contrary, I think Islam liberates women from that. Again, that sounds a bit like a cliche, but I honestly don't mean it in a cliche way. But the fact that we have a direct relationship with our Creator, we have all the tools to be spiritually uplifted, to have a strong connection, to make an impact. We don't have any boundaries by our Creator put on us. These boxes and boundaries are what people are creating, what our communities and societies and cultures are creating. So of course there is, a huge amount of value in every single person's life, independent of their marital status or whether, they, and children are a blessing, a gift that is not in our hands. The more you experience life, you realize that actually none of it is in your hands. You think it is to some extent, but it really isn't. And it can be sometimes the hardest test to be given children for some people. And it's equally a hardest test not to be. So I think personally, whether I'm writing or whether it's teaching and just general interaction, the more we collectively can keep broadening the lens, and that Islam gives us that breadth, it gives us that energy really to go out and do the best with what we are, without having these constructions that start to become a real weight on us. That's not to ignore or diminish the struggle that it is for each individual, not one bit, because I see that struggle. As I mentioned, as a mother, I'm part of that struggle, because we have the our own children's best interests at heart, whether that's a son or a daughter. You want to see them happy, you want to see them settled in whatever settled means, right? So I don't ever for a moment diminish the struggle, but also I really support the fact that there is so much more breadth to a human being's potential and value than those constructions alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that gets frustrating, I think, is that there is so much human possibility, right? Like subhanallah, like we're able to do so much as human beings. We can make such a difference, but it feels as though fulfilling certain roles seem to be more valued than having a good job, getting a promotion, writing a book. I've seen people say on social media, like, I've written this book and it's going out in the world, and I really want you to celebrate it as if I'm getting married, because that's what we have. Because when someone tells you that they're getting married, you're instantly filled with joy for them, and they're inundated with messages, congratulations, and what it may be. And just the fear of knowing, like, I've written a book, I'm putting the book out in the world, or I'm launching a business, or whatever it is that I'm doing, and I'm not going to be given the same amount of congratulations or joy, or, the same sense of community and love as I would if I was announcing that I'm getting married. Just it feels really, when you think about it, like that's really heartbreaking to hear, but it's a very, very real experience for many women. And I think there are huge challenges with women, the women are facing at the moment with finding the right spouse, especially as more women are doing more incredible things as well. Everything is, there's lots of shifts taking place around the world. But I wanted, because, you talk so much about the soul and the heart, there is this idea of believing fully in the rizq that Allah has given you, and knowing that maybe certain things are not destined for you or are destined for you, whatever it may be. But how do you find balance between accepting that something may or may not happen? And it, this, I guess, goes beyond the realms of getting married or having children. Like, could be a certain job, living in a certain country, traveling, whatever it may be. How do you find balancing accepting that something may not be for you, but also still holding on to hope, because that Allah can do anything, and Allah is merciful and kind, and He wants goodness for you, and He loves you, and you love Him? How do you balance the two?
Yeah, that's a struggle I think all of us face, and definitely something that I think Ramadan is a time when we do reflect on that a lot more, because there's so much emphasis on duaa, and duaa is always, there's so many aspects to duaa, isn't there, in terms of we're asking about our past and forgiveness, but we're also looking at the future. And in terms of balancing, Samia, it is hard. I mean, I've faced so many disappointments too. Just we're talking about books, and I'll talk about, from within publishing, and all of it can be a really rough ride. And, you can even be in a position, I've been in this position where there's contracts and you're writing, and then it's all just cancelled because of some external problem. This has happened to me, and just dealing with that, I would say, first off, it's hard, and accepting that it's hard, and accepting those emotions that we're going to have, and not feeling that we're any less, or there's something wrong with us, or our iman is not good because we are upset, because we are disappointed. These are all part of our, the imprint that we're made with. But at the same time, what personally for me is the most powerful help is that connecting and sitting still with that concept, and the really, really holding on to it almost as though it's a physical thing, and that is of risk. Because really that sorts it for me, that if something is written for us, it's not going to pass us by. Whether that's a coffee with a friend, or whether that's a job or something much bigger, it cannot pass us by. And when I struggle and I do get upset about this didn't work or that didn't work, I have to sit with myself and tell myself that no, this was not meant for you. And what is good and what is meant for us, there's no way it will pass us by. It will come to us for sure. And that can be in terms of relationships as well. Some relationships are very difficult, and they're not things that you can walk away from. It's like blood ties and families. And when you look at all the prophets, they're tested actually the most with their own family, right? So that's all part of this, what we're given and what we're not given dialogue. But I find really comfort is coming from knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for me what he knows is best for me. And it's not always what I want, it's what I need. And he's withheld things from me, again, for what's best for me. And the other thing that helps with that accepting risk is to pan right out. Almost like we're in an aeroplane, when you're flying and you're looking down and it's just clouds and you can just see landscapes, but mountains, and sometimes you see a sea and whatever, but you're at that aerial view. And mentally, I try to do the same thing, is just pan right out and see my life on this world as it's important, it's valuable, but it's a very tiny part of the eternal existence that our soul has. And so while it's important and while it is of great value, I can't see the whole picture of what the hereafter looks like and what eternity feels like. My mind still feels blown by what is eternity? We don't understand it that easily, because in this world, everything comes to an end. And so when the going gets tough, as it does for every single one of us, whether that is, jobs, marriage, opportunities coming or not coming, then that's one of the ways I look at it, in terms of how small our understanding can be sometimes, how finite. The other thing that is, and I know this is a very common discussion, I'm happy to see it so common, but the acknowledgement of our blessings and gratitude, seriously, is probably the biggest medicine after looking at my, what I just mentioned before about risk and standing back and getting perspective. It really is gratitude. I've been through very close family with terminal illness and with serious illness that they've recovered from now, alhamdulillah. But during those times, everything gets stripped, and you are left like hanging on for dear life. The fluff and the everything just gets stripped right back to basic, to our existence and survival. And at those times, I think I learned quite a bit about just being grateful for so many of our functions and so much of what we can do with our body, so much of how incredibly we're created, and being grateful for that. As at times when things are difficult, and we are going to feel those emotions where we're upset, but that gratitude at the same time, coexisting at the same time, helps. It doesn't wipe out the upset or the disappointment, but it just seems to help ride through that time better. That's one way of putting it.
Yeah, I think that last point that you just made is so it's so important, because so much of the the narrative that we're being told is like, just be grateful, and it feels sometimes just a bit too positive, like, but there's this like toxic positivity that's like everything's okay, but you just said like, but it's okay to also feel sad and disappointed, but be grateful at the same time. And it sounds like an oxymoron, but really it isn't, because you can still be grateful for being alive and be safe and the many other blessings in your life, but feel a degree of disappointment about something that isn't going the way that you want it to go, or that's caused you hurt or pain or whatever it may be. And that, I think, is such an I really hope that like people find comfort in listening to that, because it's nice to be told that your sadness is okay and it's not a sign of you being ungrateful. Because I think that's the other thing, is that we do, I think so many Muslims in particular have this kind of like religious guilt that's almost like, but if I'm too upset about something or I'm too angry about something, am I being ungrateful to God?
Yeah, I completely identify with what you're saying, because the thoughts go through my head. But at the same time, I'm always like one for just processing it as it is and out loud, as my children say. Oh, they kind of hear all the thought process, because and it can be too much sometimes, but that's just how I am. And when I look at things like, okay, feeling angry, feeling disappointed, these are the emotions we were made with. Like, I can't feel guilty for being human. And that's a lot of what Turning the Tide is about. It's like, okay, let's revitalize ourselves with the sacred text, because we're human and we have like rubbish days, and we have difficult relationships, and we have tests, and we have things that we're scared of, we have fears, we have anxieties, we have all sorts of things, but they don't have to become like the definition of us.
Yes.
And at the same time, if we acknowledge them and we say, I was crying this morning because of this, I will happily say that in the house and to friends or to whatever. I don't hide stuff like that. But at the same time, on the same day, I'm really grateful about XYZ. And isn't it actually the other way around? I don't see that as a weakness. I see that as like amazing, like what has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created? Us human beings are just so multifaceted.
Yeah.
And we're so multi-layered. And there's all this discussion, and I'm really not a technology person, but all this AI and all this stuff out there. And I hear snippets about it and I read snippets, but I think, they're never going to come anywhere near what we amazing human beings are.
Yeah.
We have all these emotions, and especially when it comes to, I don't want to be exclusive about raising children and being a mother or whatever, but in whatever sense somebody is doing that work of raising young people around them, whether they're a teacher, whether they're a youth worker, whether they're a mum, right? Whatever capacity, or an older sibling, whatever, they're all part of the raising. You have to confront so many mixed emotions, and you have to keep pulling yourself out of a lot of potholes that you fall into. It's not a walk in the park. That's just one example. But yes, coexisting, that's what I would say. All these emotions coexist, and it doesn't make anyone any less or weak.
Yeah.
But I think sharing it helps a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important just to say as well that the mental health discussion, I think is something a little different anyway. Especially, for someone that's dealing with long-term depression, I think is finding pockets of gratitude within that is very, very difficult.
Of course, yeah.
I think that's a different discussion. I think I just wanted to make that clear, because again, we don't want to be showing that to be grateful is something that you can easily do at all stages of life. And we're having this conversation about being able to do both things at the same time. But one of the things I find really helpful to remember is that we're often not in control of how we feel, because our emotions are a result of experiences or things that someone have said to us, or how much sleep we've had and what we've eaten, all these things, right? Like it's very, very complex. And just like yesterday, I was visiting my parents, and my niece, who is so full of joy and happiness usually, but was trying, I think she's 7, so she was trying to fast in between her meals.
Oh.
But she was hungry, and she just became this little monster. And I was like, you need to eat something. But it was just so funny, because as soon as she ate this, she was absolutely fine. But it just reminded me, we're really not in control of our emotions, but we are in control of, a lot of the time, what we can do about it. Like, how far do we let our anger go? How far do we, does our sadness sit? How, if we're happy, what do we do about it? Do we try and reserve it just for ourselves, or do we do something to spread the joy? Do you know what I mean? There's so much, and I find that really important as the thing to remember. But you gave this really beautiful analogy of being in a plane and looking down at your life, and actually understanding that it's such a tiny, tiny part of the hereafter, and we can't understand really how vast that is and what that is. And actually, as you were talking, I was almost laughing, because I was like, what, we can't even with certainty say what the next hour is going to look like.
Absolutely.
We don't know what it's like, right? Anything can happen. And we don't know. And so I guess remembering that as well is really important. And we see it on the news all the time, how someone's life changes in a moment, like with an earthquake or with a flood, or, and just is literally within a moment, everything that you believe to be true and everything you believe that was yours, all of a sudden isn't. Just such a huge reminder about, we don't know anything really, right? Nothing's certain.
And I'm feeling that, talking to a lot of people over Ramadan, that the example you just gave, Samia, about the earthquake, it really has shifted everybody's Ramadan in a good way, that it's just taken everyone, the shock of it, and just the sadness, and again, we can't understand what they're going through, but it really has altered I think there's a tone within Ramadan that, yes, we celebrate the month coming and we welcome it and we're really grateful for the blessings, but at the same time, the fragility of life, and how far, I think this is a discussion I've had with some people, is, how far do we actually feel like indulging? Because, a lot of people, there's a lot of crises within the country as well. If we think of economics and families, and people are struggling at every level, people are struggling. But when we see something as huge as that earthquake, then I can see, I mean, I haven't done anything in terms of an organized survey or anything like that, but just anecdotally talking to people are being a lot more mindful about choices they're making in Ramadan. Simple things. Maybe it's nice to do iftars, it's nice to share. It's not, it's nice to be together and all of that, but just bringing it down a few notches. And it's a direct response to the feeling of, my goodness, we're blessed with so much. We need to do more for others outside who are in a lot worse of a situation.
Yeah. I think the Turkey, Syria earthquakes, and even the situation in Palestine when we see escalations in violence and attacks, I think it hits that bit harder because we know that even before, these communities were struggling so much.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I think that, I mean, I know for sure, like, I have struggled a lot with it, more than I expected. I mean, I didn't expect it because I didn't know that was going to happen, but more than looking back at it, more than, I kind of thought that I might do, and I think it's just this overwhelming sense of like grief.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You summed it up. And it's kind of like muted Ramadan in a different, like there's a different sound to Ramadan.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Definitely. It's a lot. It does feel, I agree with you. It does feel a lot more somber. But I hope that that's a good thing, because it's reminding us as well about the ummah and, supporting others. And I think it can help put your blessings in, what's the word, perspective.
Yes,
which is really important as well. And speaking about Ramadan, actually, like, obviously it is a time of heightened worship and heightened spirituality, and we are approaching the end of the month very rapidly now. SubhanAllah, it's just I feel like it just started yesterday. So do you have any tips and advice on how one can keep the spirit of Ramadan alive? Because I think, let's be real, like we know that it's a month, there's a sacred month, and we put in a lot more effort. Our routine changes, not just with the fasting, but kind of the emphasis that we put on prayers at night and dhikr and Quran. And then once Ramadan ends, there is a tendency that we all have, which is like, okay, well, we kind of need to get back to real life now because I took more time off work. I made this arrangement to create more time. And everything just becomes, I feel like some people very quickly slip back into a routine that isn't, that doesn't have as many opportunities or time and space for acts of worship. Do you have any advice or any reflections on how we can kind of keep up the spirit outside of the month?
Yeah, it's a common problem, isn't it? When everyone stopped watching this or that, and then the minute Ramadan's over, I'm just as guilty as everyone.
Yeah, me too. I have these every day. I'm like, I'm going to watch that after Ramadan.
I don't even watch much, but whatever I do, it's like, after on the other side. But seriously speaking, I think it's about being real as well, Samia. And I take it in the spirit of how the Prophet ﷺ advised his companions. And I'm really paraphrasing here, when one wanted to fast all the time and one wanted to pray all the time. And he said, there's a time for this and there's a time for that. And if you were to try to be at that level all the time, you'd be shaking hands with the angels. So I take a lot of comfort in that yes, Ramadan is very, very special and dear to us. But also the reality that the 11 months can't be Ramadan. But we want to take the best from it and carry through. So over the years, different challenges. But one thing I've tried this year, and I hope it lasts, is to actually sign up to something that's going to last a year. So for me, a particular challenge is Arabic language. Quranic Arabic language, right? It's just something that I will attend umpteen tafsir courses, but when it comes to actual Arabic language, I don't know, it just doesn't happen for me. It doesn't happen. So this year, during Ramadan, I signed up to study for a year. It's only once a week, but for me, that's a start. And I'm really, really glad I did that now, because it will be one thing that's completely connected to the Quran that I can take with me for the rest of the year, inshallah. That's a big inshallah, because I know that this is like probably the hardest thing for me compared to other things. But that's sort of on a macro level. On a smaller level, I think in this last few days coming up is to have hope, and to have hope that, inshallah, it's not the end of Ramadan, and it's the way that we end that matters, right? So if we haven't had everything that we wanted to do, or we haven't been able to give the concentration we wanted to give, not to give up now and say, well, that's 2023 Ramadan gone. No, it's not. Right up until the last hour, it's there for us to connect with and to do our best with our duaa, with our concentration. Not so much the quantity, but the quality of our engagement with the Quran, the quality of even 2 nafal tahajjud, but it's the quality of it we can still keep striving for. And to go on after Ramadan is to take something that maybe, we're all different and we all excel and we all challenge with different types of ibadah. So maybe something that you found went well this Ramadan, and to hang on to that one thing and say, well, this is one thing more, even if it's a tiny, tiny, small increment for the rest of the year. It's the consistent small things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. And to take comfort again in that and say, well, I can do this one small thing more consistently for the rest of the year, inshallah, between this Ramadan and the next, and use our Ramadans as a measure for ourselves. It might be so small, nobody else will know, but actually it may weigh very heavily in our favor if it's something, we've seen in ourselves that's not a good habit. And we know, only Allah knows, and, I know, only Allah knows and you know that what that particular thing is. But we actually single that out and try our very best to, keep a check on that, keep an eye on that. So it's things that we want to improve in ourselves, taking one thing and carrying that forward. And on the other hand, things that we felt we've, got a step into this Ramadan in a positive way and take that practice forward. So I'm saying probably a bit of both, managing ourselves as well as, increasing in a particular thing that we see we've got a strength in. And we've all got a strength in something. There's not a single person out there, I believe, who hasn't got their own strength. It's just picking it up and hanging on to it, inshallah.
Yeah, and I loved what you said about focusing on quality as well, not quantity, which comes in, this idea of like not comparing yourself to anybody else. Like if you're somebody that in previous years has even struggled to fast, and if this year you are fasting more than you fasted before, or you're praying more than you've prayed before, or whatever it is, like that's huge. Like that's a huge increase in something for you personally, and like only Allah is gonna reward and hold us accountable, right? Like nothing else matters. And I found that so beautiful. And I just want to quickly touch on, you write in the book about the elderly, and I want to touch on this idea of kind of like not only how we should behave with our elders, which I thought it was really nice to see that section. I haven't seen too much actually like reflecting on the elderly really, and obviously like there's really common hadith and Quran ayahs that we're constantly reminded of with regards to being kind to our parents and making dua that Allah has mercy on them as they had mercy on us when we were young. But we talked earlier on about how there's been a shift in narratives around lots of things, but I think aging is one of those. I feel like there has been a lot more of an embracement of aging, and with the wisdom and the kind of growth that comes within that. And I mean, me personally, I think, and I don't know if it's just because, as we get older, we realize that like age, it's like the age is a number, doesn't really mean anything. thing. And, I'm in my 30s now, and I feel like I'm stepping into my own for after decades, right? Because so much of growing up is full of angst, and then once you're out of uni and you're trying to find, you're not really in a rhythm. But I feel like, alhamdulillah, that I just feel so much more, I don't know, like steady, maybe. I don't know what the right word is.
That's wonderful.
But also, like, I feel like myself, like, it sounds so strange, but I think for so long you're playing different roles, or you're focusing on different parts of your character or your personality, and trying to improve different skills or whatever it may be. But I just kind of feel like now in my 30s, I know a lot more who I am. And I really hope that, like, that will just bring goodness to my life and to everyone around me as well, just because I just feel better about who I am. I'm not, I'm not like arrogant about it, and I'm massively aware of all of my flaws. But yeah, like, I found like a level of comfort, I guess. And I just wondered what your reflections are on aging and that kind of wisdom that comes with that.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear that you're so comfortable in your 30s. I think that's lovely. And I'm really glad you shared that with us, because I think there's a narrative of, there's still, even though there's acceptance and people talking more about getting older, there's still that, it slips out people's mouths. Oh, you look so young.
Yeah.
And so then what?
I get that all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So then what is it? If everyone digs a bit deeper, when they've said that, when it's just slipped out the mouth, what is it that people are still valuing? That, that being young is the thing. But no, it's actually maybe a secret, but I think life gets better as you get older. It's wonderful. I've turned 50. I'm 50 plus now. So I would say that the confidence, I think, from what I hear from you as well, Samia, is that you're confident in who you are now. You're not, it's that, like, those ages and the stages, not age, stages of comparison, or, feeling on shaky ground, those kind of go, and you, like, stand firm now, and you're like, I know who I am. That's okay. And then when you get to my end, it's just, I love it, because you feel so much more able to just say anything. And I don't mean anything carelessly, but I mean, you're really not worried about what somebody thinks anymore. And I think that's half the battle, because it's just experience. You get to the stage where you realize, if you're not going to be honest now, then when? If you can't share what you genuinely think, then, it's when is that ever going to happen? Moving on to actually what you'd asked me about was I call it the age of wisdom, treasures in the sea, for that chapter, because I really love the company of the elderly. And I have it's just some sort of blessing that there's some very elderly people who get in contact, and they're like friends. They might have come from, as in, they're relatives of a friend or whatever. But I end up, from one way or another, giving my mom, who's, mashallah, over 80, a lot of company, as well as other elderly women, spending quite a bit of time with them. And what I realized is there's still that 18-year-old inside them. They can be very cheeky and very funny, and their heart is still really young. But the beauty is they have all this life wisdom and experience wrapped around it. And that combination is so valuable. I feel it's such a tragedy in society when the elderly are kind of relegated to the sidelines as being a burden, and they feel it. They feel it. And the national discourse, the language that's used, even in conversation, right up to, I don't know, like broadsheet print media, the conversation doesn't center and value the elderly the way they really should be. And there are many cultures around the world where they are valued. right? It's not a global problem, but it's unfortunately increasingly becoming a problem. But there's so much to gain from them. There is so much in terms of their pace and their rhythm of thinking, the experiences they've been through, and their willingness to share that. You know, when you're with elderly people, they really don't want anything from you except like your full time and attention.
Yeah.
That's it. You know, they're not interested in what model phone you've got or what makeup brand you use or whatever. They just want to make that connection that they are still people. They're young people inside. And they want to feel useful as well. And so in this chapter, I also wanted to really like give that space to say that they are a center of our society. Yes, it's tragic. It's a tragic time of life too, when you see their health fading, their memory fading, they're struggling with their independence. Many people are losing their independence, mobility at this age. There's loneliness. There's so much that is hard. And that's, if anything, even more reason for us to integrate them into our lives, into our community settings, into whatever we're doing, in whatever way. You know, I'm not being idealistic. It's not easy. It's hard work. Sometimes it can be frustrating. The most common conversation I'm having with my friends and literally every peer of my sort of age is how they're managing with their parents or their uncles or aunties, whoever it is that's near them, that they feel a sense of responsibility. Our conversations are completely, you know, dominated by this because we're struggling. You know, I'll always be the first to say how realistic something is. We are struggling. We're often the sandwich in the middle. You mentioned, you know, like the struggles of marriage and that a lot of people are having. So we feel a sense of responsibility for those younger than us to try and help them on that level, or they're trying to set their lives up, their careers, their work, their whatever, their passions. You're trying to be supportive there. And at the same time, in the same breath, your elderly parent, whether that's parent-in-law, you know, I'm not splitting hairs, it's just whoever the elderly people are in your life, they have so many needs and they need you. And there's a sense, I can only speak for my peer group because we're having these discussions and they're real. There's a real sense of feeling sometimes burnt out from both ends. But that doesn't mean that we don't care about either, or that let's just, you know, shift the elderly to the somewhere invisible where we don't have to see them, hear them or anything. And it doesn't mean that we want to abandon those younger than us and say, you know, it's your life, just get on with it. We've done it all already. You know, it's not that. But I'm only saying all this because it is hard to value our elders the way we want to. And also take care of ourselves and also be part of younger people's lives as well. But this is life, isn't it? There's beauty in that too, in that variety. It's so rich as well. When I see great granddaughters, grand nieces, interacting with my mom, there's just magic that happens. It's amazing. The elderly and the very young, they're so good for each other. So it's kind of trying to do our best and keep some balance within all of it.
Yeah. And just I think, you know, some closing remarks, if you may. I think, you know, so many people around the world, many people listening will be struggling with something or another right now, whether it's you know, they've fallen out with somebody they care about, whether they're having struggles with work, with family, with their spouse, they're not able to get pregnant, whatever it may be. Do you have any parting words?
I think the only parting thing I can say is what I say to myself is that struggles is part of life. you know, that we've been created and put here for a very, very tiny amount of time. And we've been told that we are going to be challenged and we are going to struggle. And I think the only thing that I could say is to keep hope and to keep strength, that no matter what comes and goes materially for us, and no matter what comes and goes in terms of our relationships, which is also, you know, very big, heavy losses sometimes people face, that there's one constant, and that is our connection, which brings us right back to Ramadan, is that one constant that, you know, our Rabb, our sustainer, will never abandon us. And as long as we never abandon our relationship with him. So doing the utmost, I suppose, to keep watering, nurturing that relationship we have with him and gaining strength from that. Because really, again, duas are talked about a lot, and alhamdulillah, there's so many resources out there. It's amazing. It's mind-blowing. We never had so many resources on duas, but I would just come right back to basics, that hang on to and safeguard your time for dua. You know, that is the constant that will never, ever disappoint or leave or run out. It's not finite. There's no end to how much dua and how much closeness can bring us comfort, closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for your time today. It has been such a pleasure speaking to you, Suma.
Oh, no, thank you, Samia. It's an honor, really. I've only seen so many of your sort of podcasts and listened to some of them, and it's such an honor. So thank you so much for inviting me on.
Thank you so much to Suma for such an uplifting and inspiring conversation. I loved every second of it and hope you did too. If you enjoyed the podcast, please follow the Diverse Bookshelf on your podcast platform of choice and connect with me on social media. I would really appreciate it if you could rate and leave a review, as it helps more people find the podcast.